The autumn rain in Budapest, carrying the characteristic chill of Eastern Europe, lashed against the windows of the old apartment buildings from the Austro-Hungarian era in the 7th District, crackling sharply. Elena Kovacs huddled on the sofa, her fingertips unconsciously picking at the lint on the cuff of her off-white sweater. This sweater, a gift from Leo, had been washed so many times that its color had faded to that of old ivory, wrapping around her equally weary soul. The air was a mix of the sourness of the dinner wine and the cloying citrus scent of Sophia's perfume. Leo had always complained that this scent was too strong, like fruit-hard candy smashed on asphalt. Now, it clung stickily to every breath she took. At her feet, Bread let out soft, contented snores. This little dog, which they had rescued together, got its name from the golden langos, a traditional Hungarian fried bread they had shared on their first date, a symbol of simple, warm sweetness. The sound of rain outside grew denser. Elena's gaze drifted past the rain-blurred city lights and settled on the small balcony. That space had once been a love nest they had decorated with their own hands. Childish couple illustrations stuck to the wall, potted herbs for repelling mosquitoes on the windowsill, and lopsided toys they had made for Bread scattered in the corner. Every detail screamed of memories, silently. Leo had grumbled about fixing the loose screws on the balcony's cast-iron railing half a year earlier. Back then, he had been swamped with his new project in London, his phone ringing non-stop, and his mind had been elsewhere. That remark, like so many of his promises, had drifted away lightly on the wind. Now, the gap from the loose railing hid in the rainy night, like a latent amber crack. The email rejecting her illustration draft still glowed on her screen. Your style seems overly depressing lately. Depressing? Elena tugged at the corner of her mouth. She had merely painted the dampness in her heart that never seemed to dry. Sophia shuffled out of the bathroom in her slippers. Sis, Bread pooped on the carpet again. It stinks. Elena didn't move. It might have an upset stomach. Clean it up. There are bags in the drawer. Again, Sophia's voice rose. I'm your sister, not your maid. The argument was like a lit fuse, scorching the already thin air. All the pent-up old grievances, the exhaustion from constant demands, the loneliness of a broken relationship, and the dizziness from the wine, they all seized Elena at once. She stood up. Enough. This isn't a shelter. Oh, it's not a shelter? Then why are you keeping me here? To show off how much better your life is? To flaunt that you have a man who gives you sweaters and a dog to play the sentimental act with? Sophia stepped closer, her voice sharp with malice, the citrus scent almost suffocating. Bread was woken up, and it cowered anxiously between them, barking to in the chaos. Sophia shoved her hard. Elena stumbled backward, her elbow slamming violently against the balcony doorframe. The searing pain made her let go of her arms instantly. A golden figure broke free in panic and leaped toward the balcony. Time stretched infinitely. Elena smelled the stench of rain mixed with the sickly sweetness and heard Bread's short, shrill whimper, like a cold needle piercing her eardrum, overlapping with a long-buried sound of fear in the depths of her memory. Her fingers grasped uselessly at the air. She only managed to feel a few strands of warm, soft dog fur brush past her fingertips before they were swallowed by the cold rain. From downstairs came a dull, heart-stopping thud. It was soft, yet it was heavy enough to shatter her entire world. Sophia's face turned deathly pale. She stepped back as if she had seen a ghost, then spun around, crashed through the door, and fled into the hallway, her footsteps fading in a panic. Elena froze where she stood. Rain rushed in through the open balcony door, drenching her cheeks in sweater, cold to the bone, a cruel contrast to the faint warmth of Bread's saliva still lingering in her palm. She inched toward the balcony, her vision blurred by the rain. Below, that familiar golden bundle lay motionless on the cold, wet ground. She sprained her ankle when she rushed downstairs, but she felt no pain. Cold rain streamed down her face. She dropped to her knees beside the small body, her fingers trembling as she touched it gently. It was still warm. Its soft golden fur was matted by the rain. Just moments ago, it had been licking her palm. Mrs. Esther, her neighbor, hurried over with an umbrella. Oh my God. Elena, what happened? Elena looked up, rain streaming from her hair into her eyes. Her voice was broken into disjointed fragments. It was just licking my hand a second ago. I had it, I really did. She clutched the soaking wet sweater to her chest. It's just like the cat when I was little. I still couldn't hold on. I never can. In that moment, she wasn't a 28-year-old illustrator. She was the 8-year-old girl who had hidden in a dark wardrobe, clamping her hand over her mouth, listening to her father's roars, her mother's sobs, and finally, the shrill cry of her favorite cat, followed by a heavy thud outside the window. Pets aren't light, Nuan Yu, soft spots that lead to loss. Love is the prelude to hurt. This desperate equation seemed to be etched into her blood. Leo Vance returned to Budapest 3 days later. The air was steeped in the chill of early winter. He was in town for an international architecture exhibition. When the plane landed, he saw the Danube River through the porthole, like a gray-blue satin ribbon. He still carried the mist of London on him, mixed with the sharp, cedar-based scent of his perfume, a change suggested by Clara's secretary, his mother, to better fit his image as the heir to the Vance family. The sunny citrus scent he had once worn, the one Elena loved, had long been discarded. His overcoat was a gift from Elena. Its collar had an almost imperceptible wear. Right after the architecture exhibition's press conference, Marcus called, his voice calm and restrained. Leo, bad news. Elena's dog, Bread, he fell off the apartment balcony and died. Leo's heart sank. When? 3 days ago. It's being called an accident, but there are some unpleasant rumors online. Marcus paused. Do you want me to handle it? Leo tightened his grip on his phone. He thought back to their breakup argument half a year earlier. Elena had huddled on the sofa with Bread in her arms, tears streaming silently down her face, her voice tired and desperate. I feel like I'm being crushed by work by him. I can't seem to do anything right. Back then, he had been swamped with the London project, and his mother had been calling nonstop with demands. He had dismissed her words as just another of her emotional outbursts, brushing her off with "don't overthink it." He had even forgotten to hug her. Had she really seen Bread as a burden? The thought slithered into his mind like a venomous snake that he rushed to the old apartment building and stood there for half an hour. The cold wind cut through his overcoat, but he didn't notice. In his hand, he clutched Bread's collar. The metal clasp was rusted, the one he and Elena had picked out together at a small street shop. Marcus had somehow found it and given it to him. Inside the apartment, Elena was packing up Bread's bed. She picked up its lopsided toys one by one and put them into a cardboard box, her movements slow and mechanical. Every time she placed one inside, she murmured to the air, "I'm sorry I didn't watch you." When she accidentally poured half a bag of dog food into the box too, she scrambled to fish it out, repeating the action several times, her eyes empty. She was still wearing that old off-white sweater. Wrapped in it, she looked like a leaf ready to wilt at any moment. That Leo's heart ached sharply, but his bitter suspicions, combined with days of exhaustion and worry, instantly overwhelmed his compassion. Looking at her numb state, he remembered her breakup cries of being crushed. Anger, mixed with the pain of having their shared memories betrayed, swallowed him whole. He strode over and slammed the rusted collar onto the table with a harsh clatter. "You said having a dog was tiring." His voice was as cold and hard as the unburned charcoal in the fireplace of his London villa. "You said he kept you from focusing on your art. Now it's over. Finally free, aren't you?" Elena looked up suddenly, all color draining from her face. Her lips trembled, and her eyes filled with tears, but she stubbornly held them back. She wanted to explain about Sophia, about that damn loose railing, about the ancient fear of her father and the cat that had been triggered in that moment. But the lingering effects of the wine and the trauma of the incident felt like a cold hand clamping down on her throat. Her words dissolved into broken sobs. "It's not like that. Leo, when I saw Sophia push me, I thought of Dad. Dad!" Leo cut her off, a mocking twist on his lips as he misinterpreted her fragmented explanation. Elena, you always hide from your problems. Are you even trying to destroy our last memories? He slammed the door and left. The loud bang echoed through the empty apartment, making the couple's illustrations on the wall quiver slightly. Elena collapsed to the floor, tears finally pouring out. She stared at the cold collar on the table, as if gazing at another irreversible loss she had been condemned to. Outside the window, Budapest's sky was overcast with not a glimmer of light. Worried about Elena, Mrs. Esther had gone through the community senior center to get in touch with Dr. Ivan Novak's psychology clinic. The clinic was warmly decorated, with soft yellow walls, plush sofas, and a few potted plants in the corner. Only a small succulent on the windowsill looked withered and shriveled, neglected, yet clinging to life, as if silently fading away. Elena sat on the sofa, twisting the hem of her clothes with her fingers, too afraid to look up at Dr. Eva's gentle yet overly clear eyes. She bit the end of a pencil, a nervous habit she had when anxious or thinking, its tip covered in tiny tooth marks. "Ms. Kovacs, can you tell me what happened that day?" Eva's voice was calm, with a rhythmic warmth that felt professionally reassuring. Elena opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She bowed her head, pulled her sketchbook out of her canvas bag. Its cover was made of high-quality hard leather, a birthday gift from Leo. Inside were countless drawings of Bread in all his silly moods and sketches of Leo bent over his blueprints. But several pages in the middle had been torn out. The ragged edges looked like ugly scars, ripped out in a fit of agony during their breakup half a year earlier. She flipped to a new page and began to draw, her hand trembling. The pencil scratched across the paper, its lines messy and urgent. She drew the rainy night, the balcony, the little girl hiding in the dark wardrobe. Through the gap in the door, a man's violent figure and a frightened cat. As she drew, tears fell silently onto the paper, smudging the pencil lines. I couldn't look at Bread's body," she finally said, her voice hoarse. It was like I couldn't look at Adam's funeral. The moment the name slipped out, Eva's hand, mid-note, paused almost imperceptibly. She looked up at Elena. A flicker of unexpected pain crossed her eyes, which usually maintained a professional distance. The withered succulent on the windowsill seemed to scream silently of a similarly hidden story. Eva took a deep breath, struggling to stay calm. "Why couldn't you look? If I did, he'd be truly gone. Like my dad, the day he threw my cat to its death. I hid in the wardrobe. If I didn't go out, didn't look, I could pretend it was still there." Her shoulders began to shake violently. "Leo says I did it on purpose. I didn't. I really had him. I held on." She repeated the words over and over, as if trying to convince herself or pleading to an invisible court. Eva fell silent. The clinic was so quiet that they could hear the soft wind outside. She stood up and walked to the window, her fingers brushing lightly over the succulent's shriveled leaves. "Elena," she said, her back to her, her voice suddenly losing some of its professional detachment, revealing a raw weariness. "You know what? We think if we just don't look, don't touch something, it'll stay the same forever. But the truth is, it's just fading away somewhere else." She turned around, her eyes glistening with the same tears as Elena's, though she forced them back. "Next time, let's talk about your father. And that cat, okay?" Elena nodded in a daze. When she left the clinic, she glanced back at the succulent. Eva was watering it carefully with a small spray bottle. Her movements holding a sorrow Elena knew all too well. The sorrow of trying to make amends for something lost. Luka Petrovich's Black Bean House animal shelter was as messy and warm as ever. The sound of barking filled the air, mixed with the sense of disinfectant, dog food, and animal fur. But Luka's mood was unusually heavy. The news of Bread's death weighed on his heart like a boulder. This little dog was one he had rescued from a slaughterhouse 3 years earlier, its hind leg broken, its eyes filled with terror. Elena and Leo had promised so gently to give it a home. Luca still remembered how Leo had knelt down to apply ointment to Bread's leg, his hands careful and tender. He refused to believe Elena would ever hurt Bread on purpose. Intuition drove him back to the old apartment building. The scene had long been cleaned up, but Luca's eyes scanned the balcony like a detective's. From years of dealing with broken cages, he noticed the unnatural looseness of the balcony railing almost immediately. He found an excuse to go upstairs, and with Elena's consent, she was still recovering from the shock. He examined the railing closely. The screws were so loose he could almost twist them by hand. Crouching down, he found a half-rusted screw of the same size in the corner, apparently dropped and unnoticed earlier. A vague memory surfaced. He seemed to have run into Leo at a hardware store half a year earlier. Leo had been holding a box of screws, just like this one, and had mentioned in passing the balcony railing at the apartment has a small problem. The clues were like scattered beads, slowly coming together. Meanwhile, Sophia was having a hard time too. She had hidden away in her tiny rental apartment, and every night, the memory of the argument, the push, and Bread's whimper as he fell replayed in her mind. She had bought Elena's favorite cherries, but several times she had walked to the entrance of her sister's studio, only to shrink back in fear. The plump, red cherries in her pocket were squeezed almost to pulp. The cold juice soaked her palm, like the unstopping tears of remorse in her heart. Luca found her, not at Elena's apartment, but in the alley behind the cafe where she worked. Sophia was hiding by a trash can, smoking, her fingers trembling. Luca didn't beat around the bush. He pulled out the rusted screw and the photos he had taken of the balcony railing. Miss Sophia, was Bread's death really just an accident? His voice was quiet but carried an unshakable weight. I know you were there that day. Sophia stared at the clear image of the loose railing in the photo, then at the rusted screw. The color drained from her face. The cigarette fell from her fingers. A few anxious barks came from the shelter, like a drumbeat questioning her conscience. She thought of the little dog cowering in the corner of the shelter and how it looked just like her, afraid of being punished for doing something wrong. All her usual willfulness, her jealousy, her habit of picking fights to get attention, they all seemed ridiculous and pathetic in that moment. She covered her face, her shoulders slumping, her voice breaking into tears. I didn't mean to. I really didn't. I fought with my sister, and I pushed her. She hit the balcony, and then the dog just... The truth came out. Luca patted her shoulders silently and handed her a tissue. The girl, who was always so impulsive, cried like a lost child a few days later. Elena noticed that the loose balcony railing had been fixed, tightened firmly. Next to it, there was a small pot of fresh geraniums. Under the flower pot was a note, written in Sophia's messy handwriting. Sis, I'm sorry. I left the cherries at the door. They're sweet. Elena stared at the potted plant, which still held its green leaves stubbornly despite the early winter chill, then at the bag of cherries by the door, their redness almost painful to look at. She fell silent for a long time. Finally, she picked up a cherry and put it in her mouth. It was sweet, but with a faint, unnoticeable sourness. The pit was hard, pressing against the bottom of her tongue, like the unresolved rifts still lingering in her relationship with her sister. But she didn't throw away the bag of cherries. The truth was like the Danube's waters, slowly but irresistibly washing away the mud of misunderstanding. Marcus Wright, a lawyer who prided himself on rationality, fell into an unusual silence after receiving the evidence Luca had gathered, photos of the railing, the screw, a recorded statement from Sophia, and learning privately about Elena's anxiety disorder diagnosis. Sitting in his spacious, cold office in a high-end London law firm, he flipped through her medical records. A small folded drawing fell out. It was in Elena's style. Leo, silhouetted against the dim light of a temporary office on a construction site, bent over his blueprints, his brow slightly furrowed, looking utterly focused and endearing. On the back of the drawing, there was a line of small writing. He said, when this project ends, he'll design a house with a big balcony for me, for Bread to run around in. Marcus thought of his own childhood in the slums, of his mother working 3 jobs to put him through school, her tired but hopeful eyes, of the times he had blurred his own moral lines to get ahead. For the first time, he realized that the rationality he so admired was sometimes just a polished form of indifference. He picked up the phone and called Leo, His voice was still steady, but with a faint warmth it had never carried before. Leo, I think you need to see something. Don't let prejudice blind you. Leo was at his mother's villa in London when he received the encrypted file from Marcus. The large, cold fireplace in the living room had a half-dead fire burning in it. Mrs. Clara, dressed in an expensive pearl outfit, sat across from him, pressing him to consider an engagement to his business partner's daughter. The pearls glinted with a cold light that stung his eyes. He opened the file. Elena's medical records were detailed enough to make his heart ache. Those mood swings he had dismissed so lightly had piled up into such heavy pain. The close-up photos of the railing, the rusted screw, they felt like needles piercing his chest. He thought of the promises he had forgotten, of the nights Elena had sat by the window with bread, waiting for him to come home, of the anxious look in her eyes when she had tried to speak to him. Guilt flooded over him like a tide. Ignoring his mother's disapproving gaze, he booked the earliest flight back to Budapest. Instead of going straight to Elena, he first visited Mrs. Esther. The old woman said nothing. She just pulled out her phone and opened her photo album. It held hundreds of photos. Elena gently brushing Bread's fur, awkwardly feeding him medicine, staying up late to sew him lopsided toys, holding him by the window as she watched the rain. In every photo, the look in Elena's eyes as she looked at Bread was filled with unreserved love. Love isn't just words, Mrs. Esther said softly. Her gray hair was tied back with an old blue ribbon, a gift from her late husband. It's the small things you do every day. That's how I took care of my husband in his last days. Leo tightened his grip on the old collar in his pocket. The metal was cold, but it seemed to hold the faint warmth of a memory. He went to the Memories with Pets memorial exhibition that Luca had helped Elena organize. The venue was small but warmly decorated. The walls were covered with Elena's illustrations of Bread, from his wobbly puppy days to his mischievous adulthood, each drawing vivid and lifelike. A long table in the center displayed photos and stories of pets brought in by strangers. Most of the edges were worn soft by tears or time. The air smelled of freshly baked Lango's cookies, warm and nostalgic. Sunlight streamed through the glass dome, gilding Elena in a soft glow. She was wearing a clean dress and talking quietly to a visitor, her profile calm and gentle. Leo walked over, holding the printed copies of Mrs. Esther's photos. "Elena," he called softly. Elena turned around. When she saw him, her eyes flickered with a mix of emotions, but she didn't look away. "I'm sorry," Leo said, his voice dry. "I always thought if I did well at work, made more money, I could give you a stable future. But I never asked what you really wanted, what you were really afraid of." He looked up at the largest painting of Bread on the wall. In it, the dog's eyes were pure, as if they could see everything. Elena followed his gaze. After a moment of silence, she spoke softly. "I should have told you too. I wasn't afraid of having a dog or of the responsibility. I was afraid that I'd be as powerless as I was when I was a kid, unable to stop myself from losing everything I cared about. Even afraid that I'd turn into someone like him, controlled by anger, hurting the ones I love." The ice of misunderstanding began to melt in their honest gazes. Leo almost reached out to brush a strand of hair from her forehead. Just then, his phone rang sharply. It was the London hospital. His mother, Clara, had suffered a sudden cerebral hemorrhage. Her condition was critical, and the company was in chaos. They needed him back immediately to take charge. The cold, urgent voice on the other end was like a hammer, shattering the fragile warmth that had just begun to grow between them. It was an unusually sunny spring day in Budapest, but the light fell harsh during their airport goodbye. Leo clung to Elena's hand, his fingertips cold. "Wait for me. 3 months at most, maybe 6. Once I sort out Mom and the company, I'll come back. We can start over. Get another dog or a cat." Elena looked into his anxious, sincere eyes and nodded, forcing a smile. "Okay, take care of her." Leo hugged her tightly, then turned and strode toward the security checkpoint, his back resolute, as if he was afraid he'd lose the courage to leave if he looked back. Elena stood there, watching his figure until it disappeared into the corridor. Then she lifted her hand and waved gently into the empty air. "Leo," she whispered to the wind, her voice so soft only she could hear it. "I'll wait for you, but I'll also learn to live well, even if I don't." She knew the distance between London's bustling, cold city, with the aristocratic family responsibilities he represented, and her small Budapest apartment, filled with memories, was more than just geographical. There, he faced the enormous task of sorting out the family business. A mother who might still be controlling even in illness, responsibilities he couldn't easily cast aside, and the heavy past between them, which would take time and effort to truly heal. When she returned to her illustration studio, the sun was already setting. The unfinished painting of the house with a balcony stood alone on the easel. Elena picked up her brush and dipped it in paint, but she paused in front of the canvas for a long time. In the end, she didn't continue painting the house. Instead, she slowly began a new drawing on another sheet of paper. Leo, wearing the overcoat she had given him, standing on a gray London street, turning back to look at her, his eyes complex, as if gazing at her across 1,000 mountains and rivers. In the background, the cold, modern skyline of London stood in cruel contrast to the warm rooftops of old Budapest behind him. As she painted, a single warm tear fell from the corner of her eye, landing on the paper and spreading a small dark stain in the gray London mist. Like a tear she couldn't hold back, like a raindrop finally falling, signaling a weight filled with uncertainty. Outside the window, spring had finally arrived in Budapest in full. The sun shone brightly, and the Danube glittered with light. But inside this small studio, something seemed to be trapped forever in the cold temperature of that rainy night.